Welcome to The Real Math of Business with Alena Bennett, where you plus this podcast equals better decisions. I'm Alena Bennett, speaker, author, and leadership expert. I work with chief executive officers and chief financial officers really to help them create universally investable companies where people serve people and then the math just works. This week I'm chatting to the incredible Karma Auden, but first, the thought-provoking question that's really top of mind for me at the moment is, where are you ignoring simple because it's not easy? We all know that simple scale, simple sells. There are already so many, sexy statements around why simplicity needs to be the thing. But why this is front of mind is I was having a conversation with my group of CFOs recently, and I was sharing with them one of my sort of core frameworks. It's very, very simple. It basically demonstrates the relationship between three key parties and the impact to business. And I was just doing it as a recap, as a way to frame the session. And what I do know is the feedback is constantly, wow, that makes so much sense. I can't wait to have the conversation with my CEO or board around this model. It really synthesizes and crystallizes what needs to be going on with the relationship between those three parties. What was brought up recently by one of our CFOs was, you know what, that all makes sense and everything, but practically it's really hard. And I think this is what really got me thinking, where are you ignoring simple because it's not easy? This framework really is talking about the relationship that exists with, we're talking usually no more than 15 to 20 people, which when we think about an organisation structure is really not a huge amount of people. So when we talk about how do we create a successful relationship between 15 and 20 people, it actually can be quite simple because the numbers are manageable. I'm not suggesting that it's easy, but I'm saying that it is possible because of the simplicity around, we're talking about relationships between a handful of people, a couple of handfuls of people. Yet it is very easy in that moment to go, yeah, that all makes sense, but it'd just be too hard to implement. So I will just ignore it and keep doing what I'm doing. I see this all the time. If we think about the leadership landscape, most of the principles are unchanged from decades and even centuries of years ago. And that is because running a business, leading a business typically comes down to some very simple concepts. And so what is all the noise that is surrounding us today in our context? I think that noise is largely created by ourselves because we choose to ignore simple because it's not easy. So the question I just want to leave you today is, where are you possibly ignoring simple because it's not easy? And now to our chat with Karma. Well, it's an absolute privilege, pleasure, and honour to have Karma Auden on the podcast today. Karma is the Chief Financial Officer at the University of New England, having made the tree change to Armidale in 2024. Her passion is financial storytelling, translating complex numbers into clear, actionable insights for better decision-making. Karma ensures finance teams understand their critical contribution to an organisation's success. She was a finalist for CFO of the Year Enterprise in 2023, recognised for her ability to communicate financial information meaningfully and in developing supportive team cultures. Karma has also been featured in Forbes for her innovative, story-based approach to accounting, highlighting her commitment to making finance engaging and accessible to all stakeholders. Karma, massive welcome. So good to have you here.
Thank you. That intro, I'm just a chick who likes numbers who moved to the country.
Okay, so already you're probably blowing people's minds. I was having a conversation with a CFO yesterday and it was like, you know what, you just need to hang out with people who kind of can get when you say I'm just a chick who likes numbers, that doesn't like completely eyes glaze over and check out of the conversation. So it's great talking like-minded to like-minded people. Your accomplishments obviously speak volumes and position you in a way that's way bigger than just a chick who likes numbers that happened to move to the country. I was sharing with our producer Jez before this call about your tree change. It's in your bio. What I'd love to do, if that's okay with you, I see that tree change as a real success for you. But perhaps if I can just get you to start by just sharing your quite very diverse and impressive career trajectory to date, your career background, the experiences you've had, and the lessons learned, all of which have kind of got you to this point where you now happen to own a property with your horses and do work that you love in a location that you love.
Okay. Really big about me. I was never going to be an accountant, which is kind of
Huh.
interesting. I was going to be a pharmacist.
Huh.
So, so that's something new that you don't know about me. So I was going to be
No.
a pharmacist. For one reason or another, that didn't happen. And I ended up going to university to do a Bachelor of Business in Accounting, but I took a different path to a lot of others. So a lot of others will go straight through university and do their 3 or 4 year degree. They'll join public practice and they'll do their professional year and then they'll go be an accountant. I did 1 year, I guess, full time at university, and then I started working full time. And so I was then studying by correspondence. It was back then because it was pre-online. And so I think I was getting my work integrated learning, which is a popular thing now. I was getting it organically as I was studying, and I think that helped me forge a different path. So I started off kind of in small business, which is a really good basis and foundation because you're dealing with everything. So if you're working in small business, your AP, your AR, your treasury, you're dealing with investment. So, and you're understanding the people behind the numbers. So if I've got a plumber
Mm.
ringing up because I was working in a small real estate office and dealing with property development and whatnot, if I've got a plumber ringing me chasing a bill, it's because he needs to put food on the table for his
Yeah.
family. So I understood from an early point of view, like an early time, what was happening behind the numbers and what they meant and how you needed to deal with people. I think one of my first forays into kind of really grasping that you need to understand the two sides of the coin is I was sitting in a meeting with my boss, who was a small business owner, and her tax accountant. And we were all speaking English, and yet I was translating between the two. And so
Hmm.
because if you've got small business owners who are entrepreneurs and they're not accountants, they're doing consultancy, they're not interested in the numbers. And they're like, why can't we just do this? And I'm like, Liz, you
Mm.
can't do this because such and such. Um, so I started off in small business. I was working in property, which was really interesting. I really enjoy working on projects so you can see something being constructed. That actually led me to a very interesting 8 years overseas. I got a phone call one year, would have been early 2008, saying, "Hi, Karma. Have you ever thought about working in the Middle East?" I said, "No, tell me more." Didn't even have a passport at that stage. And so my first visit overseas was for a job interview, and my second visit was to relocate. And so began 8 years living in Abu Dhabi in the United Arab Emirates. And I started off over there in a local construction company where I was the only native English speaker in the finance team. So I think the time that I spent over there was really good for understanding different people and how you need to change your messaging to get through, particularly when you're dealing with so many different cultures.
Mhm.
Um, and so that was interesting. My last role over there was a switch over into an education company. And that's where I really discovered that working for an organization that has a purpose of doing good can really change the focus for what you're doing. So when time came to come back to Australia, I was looking very much for an organization that was doing good. I've always kind of been studying one thing or another myself, so finding myself in the education space seemed like a natural fit. And so a few years in Canberra at the University of Canberra, and then now up here at the University of New England, where I get to live on a farm 13 minutes from work, I think I've found my home.
And what I think is just so wonderful about where you are now and, the privilege of being able to, live on a farm 13 minutes from work, doing work that you actually love. I remember having that conversation with you a few years ago where that was just a pipe dream.
Mm.
And I'm just so, like, my mind continues to be blown that it happened. You made it happen. And I just think that's wonderful. So well done.
Thank you. I think sometimes you just got to leap. And maybe that's in my DNA. I made the leap
Mm,
to living overseas. I just kind of said yes. There could have been a whole bunch of reasons we said no.
yeah.
And similarly, I guess moving 10 hours from one location in New South Wales to another, that's also a big move. So life's too short. You've got to say yes to opportunities that are aligned with what you're looking for.
Absolutely, absolutely. I want to come back to what you just said just before you talked about that, your tree change, you moved to where you are today. You said your last role in Abu Dhabi was in education, and it was kind of that first moment where you really understood the link between, I can't read my writing, but you said something about how the purpose of the job or the company can really change the focus of what you're doing. So it sounds like it was almost like there was a light bulb that went off, or it was almost like the clouds parted and you saw something about business that you hadn't seen before. Can you just tell me a little bit more about that moment of unveiling and the new learning that you had?
So I think for me, I had a really good solid grounding in kind of property development and that's really good for understanding processes and systems. But at the end of the day, you're building a building and you might be talking about shareholder returns or
Hmm.
like what are you doing that is good for the world? You're actually maybe building something that's unless you've got a corporate a CSR program, you've got some kind of responsibility program, you're not necessarily doing something. So I was very lucky that the organization that I worked for at the time did a lot of UK government funded work in Africa. So they had an office based in Kenya and it was UK government funded work to ensure that people could get to school. So they were working on a program to keep girls in school for longer so that
Wow.
and this was supporting girls in rural locations in Kenya. So part of the grant was how do we deliver solar lamps to people so that they can study because they don't have the electricity. Like it's going back to circumstances that are so far removed from what we tend to see day to day. And as an accountant, you kind of go, oh, I can't do anything. But as an accountant working for an organization that is doing good things, you get to go home at the end of the day and go, I did something good for the world today. And it really changes the way you look at things. It makes the hard times a little bit easier. And it makes the work that you do more rewarding. I can't explain it, but it was a real shift for me.
Yeah, it certainly sounds like it. And actually, one of the things that you said in your story really resonates with me. And that is when you said, when you had to call up the supplier because the supplier was chasing payment, you understood that it wasn't just about the money. They actually were trying to make sure they could put food on the table. Like there was something real and tangible about that conversation that actually wasn't really about the numbers. It was about their livelihood. You also said that you enjoy something being constructed. One of the things that I know I like, I have this friend of mine who runs or has run a business in the past that made children's shoes. And every once when you're dealing with stock, you've got to do stock takes and warehouse clearances and all the rest of it. And she always knew she could ask me because anytime I could get my hands on something, I'd be super excited. And I'd be like, yeah, like let me in there. And I think there is something about when you are playing with numbers and when you're dealing with numbers every day that are intangible, it's great to be able to get that tangible, see the tangible impact of what you're doing. So I can kind of
Yeah.
see that that's something that you and I share in common and has been a common thread for you. And it makes what you say around that, as an accountant, you could see that what you were doing was having a meaningful contribution, how that could change things for you. I'm wondering, with the benefit of some reflection and hindsight, can you recall any observable differences, how the people around you behaved, perhaps? How that might have, when you think about construction for construction's sake, what those observable behaviours were compared to construction for purpose.
I can because I think that look, I've worked with some great people in every single role, but I think that you maybe see more empathy in people when you're working in a role that has a full purpose or an overarching mission, and it changes the nature of the conversations that you're having. So I think it's the difference between impact and outcome. So I think if you are looking at a construction type business, you're probably looking at an outcome. Have you built a building? Have you done this? Have you done that? Rather than what impact is it having on the people or on the world? Whereas if you're working in probably more a service industry, but I think for me, because I've been focused very much on education, what is the impact? When you're working in businesses where you have a lot of grant funding, that's very much the focus because they want to know
Mm,
what impact they're having with the funds that they're investing. And so I think the nature, even though you're still talking finances, the nature of the conversations has a different flow because you're always kind of coming back to what impact are you having and how do you balance. So the big thing when you have restricted funds, because a lot of this work is more in the not-for-profit space,
mm,
um, you're balancing cost versus quality. And so you're always having that impact discussion. How do we get the most impact when we've got a restricted pool of funds?
mm.
And so you're very much kind of leveraging that and having those discussions along the way.
Okay. I didn't know we'd go down this rabbit hole, and I don't know if we will go down the rabbit hole, but you've piqued an interesting thought what I think that is interesting thought in my
Yeah.
head. You have just said, you know, it's really challenging when you're working in that not-for-profit space because you're balancing cost and quality, and particularly in that not-for-profit space, you're dealing with a restricted pool of funds. There would be people listening to this conversation in big corporates, for-profit corporates, going, well, hang on a second, that's my challenge too. Now, I'm curious to just understand, because you've operated in both contexts, when you were talking about the distinction between cost and quality in the context of restricted pool of funds, what's that nuance between not-for-profit / for-purpose and for-profit big corporate?
If you're for-profit big corporate, you're probably going to have a little bit more flexibility or a little bit more room to move in your pricing discussions to some degree. Whereas if it's a grant funded or a full purpose, you generally you've got a dollar figure, you've got an envelope, and that's
Correct.
it. There's
Yeah.
no room to move there. And
Yeah.
so I get that they are essentially the same
Yeah.
discussions, but there's just a nuance there that is a little bit different. And it depends on the corporate too, right? So some
Of course.
corporates, it will be a pricing discussion first and impact second. But if you're working for a not-for-profit, it's always impact first
Mm, mm.
because it always has to come back to the mission.
So I guess what we're talking about then is that actually, generally speaking, and there's always going to be exceptions to the generalization, there are more what we call levers in a for-profit corporate than a non-for-profit or strictly
I think
for-profit.
I think they are. It's going to be different in it. I'm
Yeah.
not saying that that's a hard rule, but
Yeah.
from what I've seen, I
Yes.
think that would generally be true.
We've started talking some finance jargon. We've started talking about levers. So let's kind of get into
Yeah.
storytelling and financial storytelling, and maybe we can do so through that lens of the difference between the impact and outcome, because I think that's a really interesting nuance there. I think storytelling is something that kind of got sexy, has kind of got sexy over the last 3 to 5 years, right? You know, I would my experience is when I first started at university doing a Bachelor of Commerce, if you mentioned telling stories around numbers, you were probably talking about fraud. It was like a big no-no. If there was a phrase for financial storytelling back then, it was just sharing a bunch of numbers, which you and I
Mm.
both know is not financial storytelling. What do you mean when you talk about storytelling? Like, what does that mean to you when you think about and talk about and write about storytelling?
I use the frame storytelling, but it's not. I'm not sitting here going right every time I present a monthly year to date. I'm starting off with once upon a time. Like it's not that kind of storytelling. We're not sitting down for kind of nursery rhyme hour or anything. I probably break it down to what are some of the tools that you use when you're storytelling and how can you bring that into your finances. So if I look at a profit and loss or any kind of financial statement, what if we considered that they were chapter headings of a book, and that's how you
Hmm.
break it down? Um, every single number, a number is just a number, right? A number in and of itself is
Hmm.
just a number. But what does that number represent? Every number represents a person or an activity. So it's how do you use the face value of the statements to then get into, I mean, we always talk about understanding the business. So I think I may be just taking it a little bit further. And for years and years and years, we've always put the onus on the non-financial people to learn our language, right? So we've always gone, how many courses have you seen over the years? And they're still out there, finance for non-finance managers.
Hmm.
It's everywhere. I would ask, why don't we flip it? So why don't we do non-finance for finance? Why is the onus on the others to learn what we're saying? Why can't we change the way that we present
Hmm.
to our audiences so that we're on the same level and that they understand? I think it has to go both ways. So when I talk about financial storytelling, that's really the essence of what I'm talking about, is how
Hmm.
do we communicate our numbers and what's happening with our numbers in a way that makes sense to the people who need to receive the information, rather than trying to give them accounting 101 so that they
Yeah.
can even enter the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So maybe let's look at the difference between impact and outcome. Yeah. Because there will be some people that actually, wear a badge of honor. I am outcomes focused. I only want to talk about outcomes. And there will be others that go, I'm just very impact oriented and I want to know the impact of any investment that we make and all the rest of it. How would you tell a story, or how would you use those tools of storytelling to distinguish between those two concepts? Or maybe, because I know I've just put you on the spot with that and it's hard to make up things that don't exist.
Mm.
Maybe you can think about a presentation or a talk that you've given where you have talked around impact and contrast that to one where you may have had to be more outcomes focused. What is the difference between your approach and the tools you use for storytelling between those two?
So outcome is almost an action. So if I want people to take an action, how do you build up towards supporting why that action needs to happen? And so you, I don't know that it's necessarily one or the other, because you could almost say that an outcome leads to impact.
Absolutely.
But outcome is more an action driven, whereas impact is more a change in feeling, I think. So for me, impact, and if I look at what I'm trying to do here in my current role, is I'm trying to make sure that people see finance as more than just people who do numbers. So impact for me would be if I have people coming to finance first when they have a new idea,
Hmm.
um, if they want to develop something, so they can see the value that we can add to something, rather than just saying, I've got this great idea, I'm going to write a business case here. Oh, I need to do a financial model. I better go and see finance.
Yeah.
Impact for me is starting to see a shift so that we're there at the beginning of the conversation. That doesn't really answer your question
No,
about
I
what
think it
tools and
does actually.
techniques, but I think impact is building, more empathy and alignment and connecting more with your audience or the people that you need to work with.
Yes, and actually, I actually, what resonated with me about what you said is that maybe the outcome, like what I can see, even in our conversation between the difference between corporates or for profit and the, not for profit slash for purpose, is maybe in for profit corporates, the conversation can easily stop with outcome. But
Mm.
actually, when we're talking about for purpose and or not for profit, the more helpful conversation is actually to talk about the outcome and actually lean more heavily on the impact, because that's what's most important. And maybe that's the answer. It's not one or the other. It's what's the conversation that's most relevant given the audience that you've got.
Yeah, and it's how the two interact.
Absolutely. So you and I, we've had that. We're born and bred with like numbers, data driven, like hard stuff, right? maybe maybe the conversation around impact only works if you've got the substance and grounding of the outcome as well. So maybe a conversation around impact, if you don't have the robustness of the outcome sitting behind you, which is how we've been trained, classically trained, maybe the impact conversation, that's what gives it substance, that's what gives it guts and credibility.
And look, and maybe that is where financial storytelling comes in. Maybe financial storytelling is a bit of a link between outcomes to impact,
I could see that being the case.
because it's giving people feeling. So
Hmm.
on that, I go back to let's cast our minds back to the COVID era. Yeah, I know. And setting budgets in a COVID era.
Yes.
I mean,
Yep.
that if there was ever a lesson in fortune telling, that was probably it, right? And I remember going into, this is back when I was still based down in Canberra, and I remember doing a budget presentation for essentially a council, so our board, and going into that, and I went, I need to be able to set the scene going into this budget presentation. I need to have all of the members of the board in the right frame of mind to know that this is not easy and we're doing the best we can.
Mm.
And that's where you come up with things like anecdotes and all of this kind of stuff and metaphors, and you can use those types of things. So I remember scouring the internet for kind of various quotes and bits and pieces, and I adapted something that I found, and I introduced the session. So before I even spoke about a number, I introduced the session with saying, going into this next budget period is a little bit like driving along an unknown country road at night, right? So we've all done that. We've all been somewhere and we don't know where we're going, and it's nighttime. We've got no idea where the road goes, and we can only see as far as our headlights, right? So it's not very far. You don't know and you never know when a kangaroo is going to jump out at you. I lived in the country, so that was a very real thing. And immediately, because everybody there lived in a similar area, you've immediately got that feeling of, right, I've got my eyes open, I'm driving along the country road, I'm watching out for kangaroos, I don't know what's going to happen. And so we put them in the right frame of mind to then have a discussion about, right, we're going into 2021. We've already had 12 months of COVID. We don't know what's happening next. Here is our best guess, but you've got to kind of balance things as you go through. The interesting thing about that is it started then to create a theme for discussions when I was having conversations about budget with other directors and executive and even people across the organization. People would say, oh, I've done this, so I think we've got some extra spotlights for the car, or we've done this. Like everything came back to driving, links to driving and lights and protection and all of this kind of stuff, which is kind of fun, but it gets people more engaged in the conversation, which then for me leads to that greater impact. So that's kind of my link, if that makes sense.
It is. One of the words that you have said probably the most in this conversation, or certainly in this latter half of the conversation so far, Karma, is the word feeling. Now, I want to say we don't really often talk about feelings when we catch up, right? But you've referenced it quite a lot today. Maybe what I'd like to explore with you is, we think about the real math of business as 50% people, 50% money. And we know that those are really the two key inputs to business. How do you balance the money and people conversation when financial storytelling? How do you do that? And where does feeling come into that?
Well, I think feeling comes into it because if I go through kind of my own framework for financial storytelling, it starts off with step number one is know your audience. Who is your audience and what are they feeling? You and I, in our conversations, have talked a lot about empathy mapping,
Yes. Yes.
right? So you almost need to do a mini kind of empathy map for your audience. Who are they? What are they concerned about? So that you don't walk into a conversation with So COVID's another example. You go back to COVID, and nobody could travel anywhere, right?
Hmm.
Um, when you're working in a university, particularly if you've got a big research project or something that you're severely impacted because you can't travel. So you don't want your finance person coming and going, great news, we've saved all this money on travel. When you go, yeah, but that's destroying the progression that I need to make on a certain project.
Hmm.
So for me, the feeling part of that is walking in going, look, I know that you're really impacted because you can't travel. The good news is we're meeting budget because of that, or this is contributing towards us being able to recover better or something. So you change the messaging, and you
Hmm.
can only do that if you understand the feelings and the emotions of your audience. And I
Hmm.
think it changes the way you deliver your message. And we all go to uni. We've done our accounting degrees, and you learn your numbers, you learn your debits and credits, but you don't learn how to talk to people about them.
No, no. So, how do you've just said step one, I want to come back to your framework. I'd love for you to share your framework for financial storytelling if you're open to it. But you've just talked about, who is the audience? What are they feeling? And changing the messaging based on what you know of them. Now, I'd love to know how does that or how can that um, challenge or has that have you ever been in a situation where your integrity has been challenged? So one of the things that I consistently hear um, from finance leaders is not consistently here, but I hear that integrity, objectivity, and independence, are very strong values of me. And of course, that's because that's how we're taught. We are bound by codes of ethics and all of the rest of it. What's the latitude around changing messaging? How do you kind of get through that integrity? This is the truth. And this is the messaging. Maybe it's that, the change the narrative to get people on the journey. Don't let a good story get in the way of the truth. Like I'd love to know if your experience with if and when those lines get blurred, and how do you change the messaging while maintaining your integrity? And maybe have you ever had an experience where you have felt really challenged with how you might have to sell a story or tell a story um, that maybe wasn't 100% aligned with the truth?
I don't know that I can recall specific examples of that, because I kind of see that whatever the story is, that the truth is the same. It's the audience and the delivery that changes. So it kind of goes to, so if you've got one message, and I think I did an exercise in a recent workshop on something like this. It was right, here's an exercise where in Q2, like we're halfway through a year. We're picking an example here. We're
Mm.
halfway through the year, and we're already seeing indications that we're 30% over budget in our travel, for example. What is the messaging? So that's the truth. You
Yeah.
look at that, that's the truth. What is the messaging that you give to a finance committee versus what is the messaging that you give to the business?
Mm.
And that's where the messaging changes. And the way you deal with people changes. But at the end of the day, if you're talking numbers, I think the truth stays the same. It's the messaging that's different, if you consider the truth being 1 + 1 = 2.
Which it is.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me see if I can get that right and lift that to the real math of business. Am I right? That's very simplistic
Mm,
formula
it
of
is.
50% money, 50% people. Does that mean there's a relationship at that very highest level of the money is the money? The truth is that the truth will come through in the numbers because you can't fudge the numbers, right?
No.
Um, what's important from a people perspective is who they are, what's going on in their worlds, and therefore how you communicate to them in a way that works to deliver the
Yes.
outcome or action that you want. Is that
Yeah,
right?
it's a big part of it. And a big part of that is how do we then communicate things? So, um, for example, in many organizations, you will budget for your annual leave to be taken every year. Now,
Mm.
if you on an assumption that you get to carry forward annual leave, you might budget for people to have 48 weeks of salary and 4 weeks of annual leave. And so your 4 weeks of annual leave is built in as part of your own costs, and then you're kind of putting that away each time. Now, if people use 1 year, they only use 1 week of annual leave, the way that you've budgeted for it means that you're going to be over budget in your salary costs. And so then if somebody's got a bunch of annual leave stacked up and then they use more leave, um, and you're pulling it out to kind of, I'm not making much sense here, but it's concepts like that. So how do we explain things to people? So if we say, if you use more than your budgeted annual leave, that's actually a saving to the bottom line. We need to be able to explain that by going back and stepping people through, because otherwise people go, you're telling me to do this thing and I don't understand why.
Mm, mm.
Or, how do you equate things? So if we all took another example, because people don't understand, is you got a whole bunch of people in a meeting and you want to get something done. And if you kind of turn around and say, for the next 2 hours, it's costing the business $6,000 for us to all to be in this room,
Yeah.
we should actually, where's our return on investment on that?
Yeah.
We've got to start linking activities to numbers a little bit more so that people understand.
And as someone who who spent a lot of time, a good part of their career in public practice, um, that is kind of embedded in my brain. And, lots of finance leaders have also had that same training where they've had to account for every 6 minutes of their time. And it was very easy to calculate, this is how much this meeting is costing us. That is less prevalent. That mindset is very much less prevalent in corporate. But yes, you and I both know the thousands and hundreds, tens of thousands of dollars wasted because of executives and people in meetings. And so, yes, I agree that we need to do a better job of linking investment of time into outcome or ROI. How do we do that? How do we do that without going to a timesheet approach, which is dreadful and onerous? How do we, and I think this goes to then the education around financial literacy, I'm guessing. And so tell me about that. How does that
So
work?
it's almost going beyond numbers, and it's going to how you operate in a business. So it's getting people to then start understanding what is busy work and what's adding value to processes.
Mm.
So where are we creating our own speed bumps and getting in our own way? And what is the value of doing something differently and challenging the way that we do things? I think when you're looking at the numbers, that's the end result, right? You're looking at kind of creating efficiencies and how you can get it get a better return. But we all experience frustration in a lot of systems and processes. So it's how do we link the two together? And so I'm kind of using numbers to drive conversations about how can we change the way we do things and what is that going to lead to? Because we're all in an environment where workloads are not decreasing and we're being asked to do more with less. So how do we remove these kind of speed bumps along the way, particularly when they're things that we have created ourselves? And that almost, I'm going down a different path now because that goes down to people's risk tolerance and
Yeah.
acceptance. So what is the risk reward? What is the benefit that we're getting out of certain activities and what is the risk that we're willing to take? And it's very hard, particularly when you've got a lot of areas where you've got increasing compliance requirements. But what can we do? I have heard of this idea. I haven't seen it in any organizations that I've been in, but why do we have to approve annual leave? how often do you actually reject an annual leave application? Would it be better off to just have an auto approval and then have a notification come through to somebody once that approval's gone through so that you could have a discussion by exception rather than having to go in and approve something every single time? So how do we
Mm.
approve something by exception when the risk warrants a different approach?
There's so much in what you've just said. I mean, I think this idea of risk and reward at an individual level is so fascinating because nobody walks around going, "Oh, I wonder what my risk appetite is," maybe other than risk professionals, but we all have an innate risk appetite. And we're not talking about necessarily financial risk. We're talking about reputation risk. We are talking about
Mm.
comfort zone risk. Not that that's a thing, but so that's a really interesting concept. You then said, and then this idea of roadblocks that we've created for ourselves. I mean, gosh, if someone could hold up a mirror, I think that would be a really confronting conversation. Then we go, well, my risk appetite's not ready to see these roadblocks that I've created for myself. What I'd love to circle back to is you said that you are currently trying to use numbers to drive conversation around change. Even you use that example between what is busy work versus adding value. Maybe we can come back to your framework. You said you have a framework of financial storytelling. And I'm guessing that when you talk about using numbers to drive good conversations, you're leaning into your framework. Would you mind sharing your framework for financial storytelling?
Look, I can, and I guess it comes about with the first thing is going back to kind of numbers need a context. So if I
Mm.
say to you, and this is really hard, I normally do this with a group of people, so I can take a poll. But if I say to you the number's 911, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
American Triple O.
Yeah, and then my response will be, ha ha ha, you've been watching too much American TV.
Yep.
Other people, but so if I've got in my head, I'm trying to convey to you a message and all I give you is 911. So that's number. And
Mm.
you're thinking American emergency number. But
Mm.
what if I was talking about a Porsche 911?
Mm. Mm.
So for guys who understand cars,
Yep.
911
Yep.
9/11 is also September 11.
Yes.
So that's where you need to understand what's what. So I
Mm.
always start off with know your audience. So who is your audience and what is the context that they're coming to you with? What
Yeah.
do they understand? What are they concerned about? And that's the empathy mapping
Yep.
um, that comes to you. And then after you know your audience, you've got to kind of then work out, well, what am I trying to tell them? What's the message that I want to give them? And so you've got to start off with know your audience. What's the message that I want to give them? And then you can work through things like then we're kind of getting into well, how do you deliver it?
Yeah.
And that's where I love the phrase, and I don't know who came up with it, curse of knowledge.
Oh, yes.
So just because you know something doesn't mean that somebody else knows it.
Mm.
And I
Mm.
think we make that mistake, particularly as accountants all the time. Anybody who has any kind of technical language,
Yep.
we make that mistake all the time. How many presentations? And I've given people challenges in the past, and I said, right, can you give an accounting update without referring to a standard? It's really hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard. How do you get back to just the concepts?
And is this where, in terms of the how you deliver it, is this where you talked earlier around the tools of storytelling, so if you were talking about delivering a narrative around financial statements, you'd use chapter headings to represent the key lines in the statements. You talked about anecdotes, metaphors. Is that what you mean? Is this where you would leverage those tools of storytelling?
It really is. And part of knowing your audience is then saying, okay, at what level are you going to talk about numbers? Look, I love spending, when I've got a quiet afternoon and somebody wants me to check over a financial model, I love making a cup of tea and sitting down there and working in Excel. Like we all love Excel or
Yeah.
models and when things like, The H&R Block ad from years ago still resonates, and my husband does it to me all the time when something balances at the end, and I think that the woman in the ad goes, "Yes!" Like we all do that,
Yes,
right?
we do. We
We
do.
all do it. But if you're in an executive meeting, you don't want to be saying, right, we're 2,743,000. You don't want to be talking to the two decimal points
That's
when
right.
you're in a different audience. So aspects of the clarifying your message come down to what level of data are you presenting? Are you
Mm,
simplifying the numbers? Are you talking 2 million or are you going to the two decimal
mm,
points? So if you're talking with a bunch of your colleagues, you might want to go down to that next level because you're talking granularity. But if you're talking high level, you lose the impact. I'm going back to that impact
yeah.
statement again. You lose the impact if you drone on down to two decimal points.
Yeah.
So that's one aspect of it. The other one is painting a picture, and painting a picture is
Mm,
what visuals are you using? Like, don't just present a P&L. How can you change the way that you present things graphically,
mm,
or visually so that people understand it differently? Because people learn differently. People absorb information differently as well. So that comes back to knowing your audience again. So it's
yeah.
like I say, it's a framework, but it's all kind of a bit circular. Um, Telling a story that's using metaphors, anecdotes, similar to what I was talking about before about
Yeah.
driving along the country road. How do you
No.
develop a feeling? Um,
Mm,
and I always end with speak like a human and not an accountant, because I think if you can convey something in simple language, and simple doesn't mean that you're not smart. Simple doesn't mean that you don't know your stuff.
mhm.
I I often think that simple means that you're actually a better communicator because you can then link it to what your audience understands and convey your message more clearly.
That is a really robust framework, by the way. That's brilliant. Well done for creating it. It sounds to me like fundamentally, the numbers are the numbers. They're always going to be the numbers. 1 + 1 = 2. Yes, sometimes there's judgment, but that is the source of truth. If we use some jargon, right? That is the source of truth is the numbers. It sounds to me like the effectiveness of communication is all around people. Maybe that's the conclusion around the relationship we've drawn today. I don't know. That's kind of what it sounds like.
I think that's what it is. A former colleague of mine who's a close friend. She's in the HR space and I'm in the numbers space, and we'd often joke about, ha ha ha, wouldn't it be funny if we swapped roles for a day or a week? Um, but the thing is, I think as a chief numbers person, you're still in the people space. Like you're very much in the
100%.
people space. Well, that's what I see because that's how you deliver your message. You need to understand the people. You need to understand the business. And so I think, and that's why I've gone down the path of kind of studying some other some other areas to understand people better.
I
So I
think
think if you're looking at things like neuroscience and psychology and all of this,
mm,
I think they'd be really interesting topics to kind of overlay when we're going through our accounting professional studies. And this would be a whole other topic for another day. But as we're moving forward, you're going to need more and more of those skills because that's where the value lies.
absolutely. Carmen, there is so much more in that. And with your final statement, my brain is exploding with ideas, but we need to wrap it up now.
Yeah.
I want to say that has been such a robust conversation. I mean, we've known each other and worked together for years and talk about this all the time, but I have learned so much new stuff from today and really reflecting. You've stretched my thinking around what the real math of business is today. So I'm so grateful for your generosity of sharing. If people want to reach out and connect with you and perhaps learn more about financial storytelling or others, from your perspective, how would they reach out to you? How would they get in contact with you?
Oh, LinkedIn. And with a name like Karma, I can't hide. So, I've never actually met another one, so feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn is probably the best place. So Karma Auden, pop it in, and I'll pop up. You'll see me there with my red hair and connect. I'm actually on a quest to turn accountants into financial storytellers. So if I can find
Oh,
some more like-minded people, then
okay.
let's create a movement.
Let's join that quest. I love that.
Yeah,
Karma, thank you so much for your generosity today. This has been wonderful. I've learned so much. I hope you've had fun. Cannot wait to have you back soon. Thank you.
it's been a blast. Thank you.
And what a great chat with Karma. I mean, she's really changed my thinking around the real math of business. And I'm now thinking about the relationship between math or numbers and people as numbers being the jam in the donut. The warm, runny jam is the numbers and the people are the fluffy dough around the outside. So keep that in your mind. This leads us right into our listener question. And if you want to submit a listener question, you can now email us at realmathofbusiness@gmail.com, or you can leave a comment on YouTube or Spotify and we'll hopefully bring it into a future episode. So today's listener question is from Daniel. Thank you, Daniel. Dear Alena, what businesses inspire you and how do you approach business and why? Thank you, Daniel. I love this question, Daniel. And as I was preparing for my response, I learned actually a lot about. I learned a lot about myself and my viewpoints in going through the thinking. So I really appreciate your question. Um, all businesses inspire me. It's not because I'm a nerd. I don't spend all day, every day reading business newspapers. Because quite frankly, when I was growing up, I found that super boring, right? But what I think is very exciting and what I'm very excited by in terms of business at the moment is the business landscape. I find it so fascinating because it's huge and there continue to be so many different players in the business environment. And for me, that's super exciting because we don't know what we don't know. And I'm most fascinated by those businesses that you don't read about in the paper, but that have a passion to contribute meaningfully to their communities. And what I know about the type of work that I get to do, working with CEOs and CFOs and boards, speaking in front of large groups of people who own, run, lead businesses, is that there is a business for every problem. There is a business solving things that you don't even know that there's a problem today. And that, for me, I think is so exciting as we move, as we evolve as communities, as societies, because I really think there's a really important role that businesses have to play in the sustainability of communities in terms of their ability to positively contribute to society. As I was thinking through your question, Daniel, I was sort of writing down attributes of companies or businesses that do inspire me. And what I realized is the businesses that inspire me share the same attributes as leaders that inspire me. Because my list basically comprised of things like businesses that have a purposeful mission. Well, it's the same when I talk to leaders that really understand their own personal mission, vision, and goals. That's what inspires me. I am agnostic as to what that might be. I have some certain kind of ethical thoughts around, what I will align myself with and not. But people and businesses that have a purposeful mission, I believe is so important because that's what creates the passion that when things get hard, they will do whatever it takes to overcome those challenges. I'm also inspired by businesses that take care of people. Well, again, I'm inspired by people that take care of people, right? The whole thing around the real math of business is we want to create companies where people serve people. Yeah. Well, that starts with the individuals that lead that company. I'm inspired by businesses that have a culture of high performance, that they want to be the best they can be. Like I'm super turned on by sports high performance cultures. And I think that I think there's a real learning that businesses can take from the sports world in terms of what does high performance look like and how do we really nurture high performance as a culture. I'm really inspired by businesses that are agile. They're companies that say they want to enact change and you can actually see it. I am not very inspired by companies that are so big that it's like trying to turn the Titanic when it talks about change, that are so overwhelmed and overloaded by bureaucracy and hierarchy that actually it's just all talk. I'm inspired by companies that know they're not perfect. They make mistakes and they own up to their mistakes, just like the leaders that run them. So I think what this boils down, Daniel, for me, is that as a result of your question, what I've really learned about myself is, and my thinking around business is that I'm reminded that business is just simply groups of people that work together towards delivering products or services that work towards or achieve a common mission, vision, and goals. And so I guess what I do is I look beyond what we call the corporate veil and really think about the people that sit behind the businesses. So I know that was sort of a long-winded answer to your question, and it didn't go where I even thought it was going to go, but I'm grateful for the insight and the learning that I got as a result of answering your question, Daniel. So I hope that's helpful, and I hope that prompts some thinking for yourself. I want to thank you all for listening to The Real Math of Business with Alena Bennett. If you liked this episode, remember to subscribe for more content and to stay on top of The Real Math of Business. I've been Alena Bennett. Thank you for listening.